Hello, church. Welcome to Ezekiel 42 to 44. I want to admit something to you. I carry around in my Bible cover this little diagram of Ezekiel's temple. It's actually really intriguing to me because when I read these chapters, I find that if I have a visual to look at, it helps me picture it in my head. And then even although there's mysteries to the whole thing, then it helps me to visualize it. And then when I'm landing it on something literal that I can apply to my life, it helps me because I can actually see it. And so I want to give some examples of that. In chapter 42, verse 15 to 20, let's say, he talks about this wall. Like I can see it, these people who drew this picture, there is a wall around the whole courtyard here. And so the fact that there is a wall is very profound because God says why there is a wall. In verse 20, he says the wall is there to separate the holy from the common. In fact, in chapter 43, verse 10 to 12, the whole purpose of Ezekiel describing, or one of God's purposes, perhaps there's many, of describing this temple to the Israelites is that it would expose their sin and they would be ashamed of their sin because it is supposed to be an area that is most holy. And even in chapter 44, there's a number of verses that God is continuing to describe how his people must operate because of his holiness. And so we have to ask this question again, and I think most of us know this answer, but what does it even mean to be holy? It means to be set apart for God's purposes, to be separate and set apart. And so it's a little bit different yet than sinlessness, okay? And very simply, let me use this little table to describe it. If falling off the edge of this table is like, this is not sin and this is sin. I've fallen off the table here, I've fallen off this cliff, then I've sinned. Because you and I have sinful natures, you know what we are tempted to do? We're tempted to try and stand on top here because we know we're not supposed to sin, but we kind of want to dangle our toes over the edge kind of idea. But that's not what it means to be holy. Holy is to be set apart more where my coffee cup is over here away from the edge. In fact, if this is where we're prone to fall, being holy would mean to be standing here and even facing the other direction or not even desiring to go in this direction. And so whether our sin issue is something like gossip or slander, whether it has to do with integrity or lying, whether it has to do with any sin issue from sexual immorality to cheating or to slothfulness or whatever our sin issue is, God is calling us to be holy. Hebrews 12 says that without holiness, no one will even see the Lord. And so right out of the book of Ezekiel, we could pray and ask God a question like this: Lord Jesus, am I making every effort to be holy? Spend some time there with the Lord. Then I want you to notice something in chapter 43. Look at this in verse 1 to 4, along with chapter 44, verse 1 to 2, we notice that the glory of the Lord comes from the eastern side. And if I look at my little diagram here, whoever drew this, there's actually shadows. And you know what the shadows represent? There's some kind of a light coming from the east. It represents the glory of the Lord. It's coming from the east. That's fascinating. There's a whole bunch of scriptures actually that talk about God's glory coming from the east. And you could study that if you like. So much so that even Suleiman the Magnificent, about 500 years ago, cemented the eastern gate of Jerusalem. He cemented it shut as though to stop the Messiah from returning into Jerusalem because everybody knows he's coming from the east. But how, which is kind of laughable. But anyways, how can we apply this information to our lives today? Well, think about this. If you look back at Ezekiel 10 and Ezekiel 11, those verses indicate that the glory was there at the temple and has left out of Jerusalem, out towards the east. And now when you look at 43, 1 to 4, where is the glory coming from? It is coming from the east, exactly the same way that it left. It is now coming back. That reminds us of Acts chapter 1, where Jesus' disciples have seen Jesus ascend, and now the two angels come, and they talk about this. As you have seen him go, he is going to come back in the same way. Just like we see his glory went, and it is coming back in that same way. Jesus' return will be the same. And so we can land that up on this thought. Lord Jesus, do I anticipate your return like I should? And as we think about the return of Jesus, park there for a while with the Lord. Don't just do that flippantly, because when Jesus returns, he is coming back in his full glory. Like Kevin mentioned yesterday, we cannot stand right now. We could not stand. If Jesus' glory was to appear and manifest right here, we would automatically already be on our faces. Humans cannot live and see the glory of God. And yet one day we will. And the appropriate response is to be on our face and get down and worship Jesus in his glory. That's what happens in chapter 43, verse 2 to 3, along with 44, verse 4. And Ezekiel, as well as John in the book of Revelation, they respond to the glory of God the same way, on their face, worshiping. And so whether that happened automatically, like it seems to have happened to some people in John 18, or whether they chose to do it, we don't know exactly for sure. And I don't even know that I would spend any time arguing that. But what we can know for absolute certainty is that Jesus is worthy of getting on our knees and bowing and facing, like face down and worshiping him. And so you know what? One of the things, here's something that has happened to me personally. There's been times when I've been doing devotions, spending time with Jesus, just me and him, nobody else even at home or wherever I am in that moment. And I feel this little tug in my heart that it's like Jesus is inviting me to get on my knees or even right on my face and worship him. And in that moment, it has sometimes happened to me that I feel like, no, I shouldn't do that. That's silly. And right there, I wonder, Delan, what on earth is in your heart that you would not get on your knees? It would be an honor if you would learn from my mistake and not make the same mistake yourself. If the Lord puts that on your heart and you're by yourself and you know that you're not fooling anybody, it's just between you and Jesus, consider getting on your knees and worshiping this most holy God today. He loves you more than you know, and he's coming soon.